Because All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's Hinckley Forum. My name is Adeline, and I'm a student staffer at the Hinckley Institute of Politics. The Hinckley Institute is a nonpartisan institute at the University of Utah, which provides an array of transformative experiences for students through internships, forums, and classes. Hinckley Forums seek to foster public discourse and civil debate on the most current and pressing issues, bringing in local, national, and international thought leaders. Today's forum is presented as part of the University of Utah Societal Impact Seminar Series. We want to thank the Kem C. Gardner Policy Institute for their leadership with this event. Now, we are excited to introduce today's Societal Impact Scholar, Jonathan Rauch. Mr. Rauch is a senior fellow in the Governance Studies program and the author of several books and many articles on public policy, culture, and government. He is a contributing writer of The Atlantic and recipient of the 2005 National Magazine Award, the magazine industry's equivalent of the Pulitzer Prize. His most recent book, Cross Purposes, Christianity's Broken Bargain with Democracy, comes out this month and is the inspiration for today's conversation. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Rauch to our campus.
Thank you all so much. It's such a joy to be back in Utah. And as you all are about to hear, some of the goings-on that are taking place right here in this city are at the center of the work that I'm doing for this book and are the inspirations for this book. My name is Jonathan. I'm a journalist. I'm based in Washington. This is my, eighth or eighth and a half book, depending how you count. And I'm here to talk about two mistakes and a correction. This is me, age 16, 1976. I was a different person back then. I was gay, although I didn't know it, but I did know that there was no room within Christianity for people like me. I knew that Jesus Christ hated me because I was gay and that I should feel ashamed. I was angry at Christianity I was an atheist. I still am, by the way. I don't believe in God. My attitude started to change. A long journey began for me in college. This is me at age 19 in college. And that man here, that's Mark McIntosh. He was my freshman year roommate. We were cast together. Mark was something that I had never encountered before. Mark was a true Christian. Mark was someone who not only talked the talk of Jesus Christ, he walked the walk. He was kind, he was gentle, he was thoughtful, he had very strong views, but never in a way that was abrasive or superior. That was my first clue that, maybe there's something to this Christianity stuff after all. Maybe there's a side to it that I haven't seen. Nonetheless, this is me in May 2003. That's what, almost 22 years ago. I was by then a regular contributor to the Atlantic magazine. And this is officially, a round of applause here, the dumbest thing I ever wrote. That's it. Now, I am someone who in 2015 wrote that Donald Trump would never be president. This is dumber. This is me celebrating the rise of what I called apatheism. By apatheism, I meant basically that American society was losing interest in religion. And I thought that would be a great thing because religion is a force for ignorance, dogmatism, division, and we'll all be like Scandinavia without it. We'll get along better, society will be less divided. Here's what I wrote. I believe that the rise of apatheism is to be celebrated as nothing less than a major civilizational advance. Religion remains the most divisive and volatile of social forces. Apatheism is not a lapse, it is an achievement. Friends, I hope you never write anything that stupid. I cringe when I read that today. Because I didn't know it in 2003, but at that very moment, the country was embarking on an unprecedented experiment in secularization. You all know what secularization means. That means the reduction of religion as a force in life. Here's what started to happen. Now, this stuff is all quite recent. This is a new phenomenon. It's something that will affect your generation in ways that it has not affected earlier generations. Here, for example, is the number of adults never attending never attending religious services. That's the red line there. What you see there is just between 2008 and 2022, what's that, only 14 years, the number doubles. 40 million Americans simply leave religion. They don't go anywhere. Here is church membership in the United States. Member of church, synagogue, or mosque. As you can see, from the 1940s until the end of the 20th century, most of my lifetime, approximately 70% of Americans are members of a church, synagogue, or mosque. And of course, in America, for the vast majority, that means church. But look what happens at the end of that line. In the last couple of decades, it falls off a cliff as of 2020. Numbers that are now out of date, it's even lower today. But as of 2020, it's below half. A minority of Americans are churchgoers. Here are the numbers of people, percentages that identify as Christian versus the percentage that identify as no religion. As you can see, in only, 14 years, the percentage who's saying they're Christian falls by 15%. That's what, a percentage point every year. This is seismic by the standards of social change. And where are they going? They're going to no religion. Here's the story of what's happening within Christianity. It's the decline of white Christian subgroups and the rise of religiously unaffiliated. So let's start here. This is the story that you may have heard. Those 2 points are the continuing decline of so-called mainline Christianity. You know, these are your straight-up Methodists and Episcopals, and that movement has been in a state of collapse now for over 50 years. By 2023, it was only 13% of the population. But look at that. This is white evangelical Protestants. These are the people who are gaining market share in the 20th century as more people left the mainline churches. What you see here is an even steeper decline to the point where there are now no more white evangelicals than there are mainliners. In other words, the collapse that began in the mainline church has now come to the evangelical church. And where are they going? Unaffiliated. Right there. Results of this? So, this is where I was wrong. I thought, won't this be a wonderful thing? Well, guess what? It hasn't been so wonderful. Mental health, not good, days per month. Now, look, there's a lot of forces here, I understand that. There's cell phones and anti-institutionalism, and some people blame overparenting, helicopter parents. But, as you'll see, these lines coincide very neatly with the decline of religious affiliation. And if you look here, this is young people. This is people your age. Look at the rapid increase in mental health issues we're seeing there. This is the 2023 Surgeon General's report on the epidemic of loneliness and isolation. Now remember, we're talking here about the same period when Christianity has collapsed. Here's the increase in social isolation, the plummet social engagement with friends, fall of social engagement with others, the reduction in companionship. You could go on. I just pulled those 4 at random. There's lots more. Lacking social connection is as dangerous as smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day. This stuff is really bad for you folks. But here's something else that's really bad for you. This is a different kind of indicator. We've had a polarized country for years, that is, people disagreeing on things along party lines. But just in recent years, we've seen the rise of what's called affective polarization. That's not a disagreement about policy. That's where you actually hate and fear the other party. And look at what's happened there since 2016. These numbers have been on the rise for years, but now they have rapidly accelerated to the points where large majorities of both parties think the other side is closed-minded, dishonest, and immoral. Toxic partisanship is becoming the new religion of the United States. Now, why am I here talking about this? Why do I specifically care? Of course I care about mental health, but there's more to it than that. The founders of this country warned us that the values of the Constitution are not self-supporting. We need a substrate of what they called Republican virtue, which means virtues like being law-abiding, civil to one another, truth-loving, honest, respecting the dignity of all humans. And they knew that the Constitution itself cannot provide that. So it was going to have to come from civil society, and the linchpin of that, of course, in their day, as in ours, was Christianity. And so here are some of the things they said. I won't read them all, but this is Adams, Washington, Madison. They all said the same thing, one version or another, that the Constitution, our democracy, will not survive if religion does not do its job, does not uphold its end of the bargain to socialize us all into the principles of the Constitution. And there's something else that we have counted on historically, Christianity in America to do. So we're a free country. The Constitution and the Declaration of Independence give us freedom. But freedom for what? I just came across this clip. It's a wonderful clip from Chancellor Angela Merkel, former Chancellor of Germany, who puts it just so beautifully. Listen to this.
Freedom is something rather difficult, because then all of a sudden you have to decide yourself. I'm not only free of something, I'm free for something. Free to do something good for society. And my experience is that makes you happy.
Freedom for what? Why are we on this planet? What is our purpose for being? What does it mean to do good, and why should we care? These are the questions which the great religions have all answered in different ways, but in fundamental ways, going back to the faith of my fathers, which is Judaism, but of course Christianity, Islam, Hindu, Buddhism, and the rest. It turns out that the decline, the collapse of religious belief in America has not led to a decline of people seeking answers to these questions. Instead, they're seeking them elsewhere, in pseudo-religions like the ones that Tara Burton has written about in her wonderful book. These are things, everything from Wicca, which is witchcraft, to crystals and self-improvement, to Soul Cycle. Also, wokeness, it's argued, I think probably correctly, is kind of a form of displaced religion. The QAnon movement has many religious tendencies, but the problem with these pseudo-religions is what they don't do. They don't provide us with a transcendent moral account of why we're here as human beings, why we're on this planet, what it means to be human, and how to respect each other with dignity. Soul Cycle and QAnon and woke won't do that. Now, one of the things that's often said when I make these points is that it's my fault, because I am, after all, the secular person. I am the atheistic, homosexual Jew, and it's people like me who have made it so hard to be Christian in America. How can you expect Christianity to thrive in a culture which is so consumeristic and hedonistic and individualistic? Well, there's something to that, I'll grant it. It's a conversation for another day, but I'm with our old friend Ben. You all know this guy, Benjamin Franklin. And as he said, when religion is good, I conceive it will support itself. And when it does not support itself, and God does not take care to support it, so its professors are obliged to call for the help of the civil power, 'tis a sign I apprehend of its being a bad one, being a bad religion. In other words, if Christianity is collapsing, where do we look? Well, civil society to some extent, secularism, sure, but we also have to look, I think we preeminently have to look at what's happened within Christianity itself in America. I hope that I've persuaded you in those brief few minutes that we all, including those of us who are secular, have a stake in the continuing survival of Christianity. Doesn't mean everyone has to be Christian, but it does mean that if Christianity and our constitutional values are pulling in opposite directions, it may tear this country apart. So what's happened in Christianity that's been such a challenge? Here it is, in a word: secularization. In order to thrive, a religion needs to look different from the culture around it. The mainline religions in the latter half of the 20th century declined, sociologists say, because it stopped looking different. Christianity started looking like a lifestyle choice, a consumer good. You would choose a church or another church. It made no demands on you. People drifted off, but that's not the story I'm here to tell. A second wave of secularization began in the 70s, but really took off over the same period that we've been talking about. And that's this. That's the politicization of the white Protestant evangelical church. So starting in the 80s and increasing over time after that, white evangelicals aligned themselves with the Republican Party. They had good reasons for doing that, but they made a gamble that they could influence the party and partisan politics more than partisan politics would influence them. Here's just some of the indications of this phenomenon. As you can see, evangelicals have become more Republican over the last 2 decades. They're about 55% Republican in 2000. By 2020, they're almost 80% Republican. That's almost as close to unanimity as you can get in America. Here's their vote. As you can see, they go from, they lean Republican, but they solidify their vote in the 2000s so that they're now 80+% voting for Republican presidential candidates. This one to me is especially interesting. This is survey data that asked people of different faiths to place themselves politically on a left-right spectrum, and also to place the two political parties on a left-right spectrum. And here's how white evangelicals place themselves. Spot the difference. There is none. They are absolutely in lockstep with the Republican Party. That is not true of any of these other groups. I want to draw your attention to Latter-day Saints. They initially aligned pretty well with Republicans, but although not radically, they broke significantly in 2016. What happened in 2016? I'll leave that question to you. So the church has changed over the last 20 years. Here's how Ryan Burge, the religious demographer whose data I so gratefully draw on here, has put it. Evangelicalism used to be a term that denoted a certain adherence to a specific theology and active engagement in a Protestant community. Now, evangelicalism just means I am a conservative Republican. It's become little more than a cultural marker and has little to do with any type of religious devotion to the teachings of Jesus Christ. In other words, evangelicalism has become more of a political brand in many ways than an apostle of the Church of Jesus. Here's one indication of this. This is a peculiar number. Again, this is all happening in the same period of time, just in this century. This is the share of the public who are self-identified as evangelicals who attend church seldom or never. You can see it rises from minimal in 2008 to about an eighth of self-identified evangelicals only a few years later. What appears to be happening is that evangelicals who are there primarily for the gospel of Jesus Christ are drifting away, and other people are entering the church who are more interested in the gospel of the MAGA movement and the Republican Party. So not only is the church shrinking, it's changing in complexion to something that looks more like a partisan political group. And here's one indication of that. This is a very famous poll result. Some of you have already seen it. This is a question that gets at how important is character in a politician? Can you be a really good president or politician if you're a person of bad character? In 2011, evangelicals were the people who said character matters the most. Compared to other groups, they were the lowest number, saying an elected official who commits an immoral act in their personal life can still behave ethically and fulfill their duties in their public and professional life. And you see what happens only 5 years later. They become the group that is the least attached to the importance of character in office. A complete flip. Again, you can ask yourself, what happened in 2016? Here's another development. As we're going to see, one of the leading implications, injunctions of the Bible is don't be afraid. This is what I call the church of fear. As the church has become smaller, it has also become sharper and more organized around the idea that Christianity and our way of life and all the things we care about are under attack, under assault. And as you can see, compared with other religious groups, it is evangelicals who are now most in this mode of fear of attack. They are tied by Jews, but this poll was taken in 2024, and this is a time, of course, when Jews are under particular stress and have reason to feel that their religion is under attack. Here's something that we never used to see in America. Unfortunately, this is not super Christ-like. Question is asked, is it true? Do you agree or disagree immigrants entering the country illegal today are poisoning the blood of the country? White evangelical Protestants, the only religious group that agree with that sentiment, identical, again, to Republicans. The Church of Fear, what does it sound like? It's Pastor Jim Garlow. It's a good example.
The homosexual movement, the LGBTQ, the transgender movement is being forced upon. The climate change that's forced upon us that's taking our private property rights. And you'll go to one country after another, they use the same language over and over. Satan is not particularly creative in the way he's operating right now. I assure you, the enemy would love to take this congregation out, and they would get it by going after him. If a pastor will not stand, the people should leave that place.
They're coming to get us, and they're coming right here, right now, and stand up or it's all over. That's, ladies and gentlemen, that's a message of fear. Coming out of that is another message. which is that Christians need power. So someone who says this consistently, these are only 2 quotes out of many, is Donald Trump. 2016, Christianity will have power. If I'm there, you're going to have plenty of power. You don't need anything else, anybody else. Remember that. 2024, if I get in, you're going to be using that power at a level that you've never used before. Now, power in the earthly realm is not something that Jesus Christ preached. And Jesus certainly didn't sound like this.
We've been playing T-ball for half a century, while they're playing hardball and cheating, right? We've turned the other cheek, and I understand sort of the biblical reference. I understand the mentality, but it's gotten us nothing, okay? It's gotten us nothing.
The gospel of Jesus has gotten us nothing. And that loser guy, what happened to him? He died on a cross. Come on. This is not a very Christian way of talking. I'm an outsider. Don't take my word for it. This is Russell Moore, formerly a senior leader of the Southern Baptist Convention, now the editor-in-chief of Christianity Today. The frantic rage we can often display in supposedly protecting Christian values might feel like strength, but the world sees it for what it is: fear, anxiety, and lack of confidence. They can also see that it's nothing like the confident tranquility of Jesus. When he talks about why people your age are leaving the church in large numbers, wonderful quote, that sense of paralyzing fear can also fuel the loss of the next generation. If the only choices we offer are secularization and paganization, we shouldn't be surprised that they choose one or the other. It's not just the people who are leaving the church who are pastoral burnout. Another well-known survey result, this is a group called Barna, asked pastors, have they given real serious consideration to quitting being in full-time ministry within the last year? 42% said yes. I asked pastors the same question doing research for my book. And yeah, they said yes. One of them said 4 times. When you ask them why they're leaving, there's a bunch of reasons. One is that it's a hard job. So, number 1 is stress. Number 2, lonely and isolated. But here's number 3, the current political divisions. The wave of secularization that's happening now, moving toward the church of fear, blending the church into hard partisan politics, is not being led by the pastorate. It's coming from the pews. What the pastors are saying is, we get them for 2 hours a week if we're lucky. Cable news gets them for 12 hours. So they're bringing all this to church, and they're saying, what are we doing in this church to win the culture war? Our way of life is under attack. Pastor, what are you going to do about it? That's not why the pastors are there. They're there to preach the gospel of Jesus. But a result of this is that a gap has opened up. This is a gap between how Christians are trying to behave in private and how they're behaving in public. There's a wonderful statement of this by David French. He's a columnist for the New York Times. He's an evangelical. And he puts it this way.
The fruit of the Spirit are not just tactics to be deployed to win people over. They're the markers of who we are, okay? And then the last thing I'll say is you cannot go into the political world and say, you know I'm a bit of an asshole on Twitter, but you should see me in the soup kitchen. and that's just not the way it works. You can't cabin off parts of your life.
I love the way he puts that. But he's on to something here, right? My understanding of Christianity, and maybe yours, is it's a seamless garment. Christians are supposed to behave like Christ in all aspects of their life. And there's a word for this. I didn't know these terms until I started working on this book. Spiritual formation, also called discipleship. This is the process by which Christians attempt to make themselves in both word and deed in the image of Jesus. And it's considered the most important thing that Christians need to do. So that work has gone on reasonably well in communities. But what about the civic sphere? This is a friend of mine, John Ward. He's a former evangelical. He recently converted to Catholicism. Spiritual guy, smart guy, wrote a wonderful book called Testimony Inside the Evangelical Movement That Failed a Generation. And here's something he had to say, which became a formative insight for this book.
Of the conclusions I've come to in writing the book that I've finished recently is just that a lot of evangelical churches do a pretty good job of discipling their members in private virtue or private character within the family. Yes, there have been scandals and leadership scandals and abuse scandals, but I think broadly evangelicals are virtuous people in their homes and in their local communities, but they have not been discipled in how to exercise public character.
Not been discipled in how to exercise public character. In other words, I'm okay and I'm good in the soup kitchen, but a bit of an asshole on Twitter. If you go and you talk to the people in Nashville, North Carolina, they will say that after the flooding hit, the churches were there. They were awesome in the community. But here's the question, spiritual formation. How does Christ want Christians to behave in the civic realm? Not the individual realm, not just the church, the family, or the community, but how are we meant as Christians? I'm not a Christian, but how are you meant, I guess, as Christians to address the civic realm? It turns out that Jesus had some things to say about that. And here they are. These, according to theologians, are the three central guiding tenets of Christianity. If you had to stand on one foot and summarize the Christian religion, it would be these three principles. First, don't be afraid, the most frequently repeated injunction in the Bible, I'm told. Second, imitate Jesus. And third, forgive each other. Now, here's an interesting thing, and this is, I think, actually the central message of my book and the reason I'm here today. I'm not a Christian, but I looked at those three and I noticed something. The central tenets of Jesus sure sound an awful lot like three central tenets of liberal democracy, of our constitutional system, and of what it was that James Madison and the other founders were talking about when they talked about Republican virtue. Don't be afraid maps onto share power. You're going to lose some elections as well as win some elections. You won't always have power. Don't approach that in a spirit of panic and fear that if the other side wins, it's the end of everything for people like me. Approach it in a spirit of hope and optimism that while they're in power, you can thrive and learn something and get something that'll make our country. Imitate Jesus. Jesus' core messages are, number one, every human being, including, in fact, especially the lowest and most marginal, is an individual of dignity and should be treated that way. And he's a radical egalitarian. He says it doesn't matter who you are, high or low, you share in that dignity. Those are also the two central tenets of liberalism. I mean small liberalism, like, by the way. I don't mean modern progressive left-wing stuff. I mean the faith of the founders, based on the idea that all humans are created free and equal. That's the system that we live in today. So liberalism preaches the fundamental equality of all humans. That's why we all have the same number of votes. That's why we're all entitled to run for office. And it preaches the dignity of every individual. Under liberalism, we can disagree and we should disagree, but we are supposed to remain civil. We're supposed to treat each other decently as human beings. Forgive each other. That translates to pluralism and toleration. It's not retribution. It's not if I win the election, I am going to crush the other side. I'm going to salt the soil with their tears. We're going to crush the liberals, crush the conservatives. Instead, when I come to power, I'm going to show forbearance. I'm going to treat the other team the way I will want to be treated when someday they come to power. because we've got to share the country. Turns out Jesus Christ and James Madison are very much on the same page. So it turns out that implicit in the Christian faith are the elements that are necessary for a civic theology that would allow Christians to disciple themselves in the image of Jesus and James Madison, not the image of MAGA. So I looked around the country and I noticed something way back in 2015 that amazed me. And it happened right here in Salt Lake City. This is the so-called Utah Compromise. What you're seeing here is a landmark in which the conservative Republican legislature, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and Equality Utah, the LGBT civil rights group, that's their leader at the podium, announced a compromise extending anti-discrimination protections to LGBT Utahns, and along with that, some carefully crafted and targeted exemptions for religious communities so that, for example, BYU does not have to house same-sex married student couples in their housing. This had not been done before, and it was done with the leadership of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Here's the signing ceremony. That's the governor. What you see there in the Utah State House are gay, lesbian, transgender couples cheering and applauding. This was truly a landmark day. I didn't think I'd live to see that. This is very, very countercultural for a conservative church, a church that believes that homosexuality is a sin, nonetheless, to do this kind of compromise. What's happening here? Well, it turns out that there is one major Christian church in America that is doing the work of developing a full-fledged civic theology, a whole theology around how would Jesus want us to behave in our civic lives. Raise your hand if you know this guy. Stalin Oaks, first counselor, the first presidency of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. He'll be the next prophet, I think it's expected. He's a constitutional scholar, a lawyer, former justice of the Utah Supreme Court, president of BYU, and now a senior church official. Here's one of the speeches he gave in an important series of speeches outlining how the church believes Jesus wants church members and all humans, not just church members, to approach politics.
We've always had to work through serious political conflicts, but today too many approach that task as if their preferred outcome must entirely prevail over all others, even in our pluralistic society. We need to work for a better way. I come to you not as a lawyer with the experiences already mentioned by Rick Turley, but as an apostle of the Lord Jesus Christ, whom many of us worship. I advocate the moral and political imperative of reconciling existing conflicts and avoiding new ones, not to promote my favored outcome in any particular controversy. The goals of both sides are best served by resolving differences through mutual respect, shared understanding, and good faith negotiations. And both must accept and respect the rule of law. What I have described as necessary to going forward, namely seeking harmony by finding practical solutions to our differences with love and respect to all people, does not require any compromise of core principles. Both religious and secular rule are ordained of God for the good of His children. Reconciling adverse positions through respectful negotiations is a virtue. What if the conflicting demands of civil and religious law are such that they cannot be resolved by negotiation? Such circumstances rarely exist. If they do, the experience of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints suggests that a way can be found to reconcile divine and human law through patience, negotiation, and mutual accommodation.
Patience, negotiation, and mutual accommodation. Those are core tenets of our constitutional system, which is all about patience, negotiation and mutual accommodation. And I gave President Oakes a lot of time there because I wanted to show you that this is a deeply thought through theology. This is not a strategy or tactic. This is, in his view and the church's view, what it is that God wants of members of the church and of human beings. And there's a fully articulated philosophy or theology behind this. Now, I am not suggesting that other Christians should become Latter-day Saints or adopt the same theology or anything of that sort. But what I am saying here is that here we have a living example of a church which, like the white evangelical church, is predominantly white and very conservative, yet nonetheless is moving in this profoundly countercultural direction to reduce the culture wars, to look for ways to accommodate and live together. And not out of some notion that that's just a strategy, but because it's what Christ wants us to do. And what I'm saying is that Christians generally can draw inspiration from what the church here is doing. Now, there are people within other Christian denominations that are beginning to do this work of defining what it means to be Christian in public life today. Redeeming Babel is one of them. They've got a wonderful project working on this. Center for Christianity in Public Life, just founded a couple of years ago. The One America movement, which is giving pastors the resources to work on depolarizing and depoliticizing their congregations. The After Party, this is a movement led by David French and Russell Moore, who you've heard from, among others, which is working on creating civic teachings for small groups in evangelical churches. This is a group I only just heard of the other day. I'm having coffee with the pastor who leads them. The Center for Christian Civics, which is doing this work. So we're beginning to see the sprouting of an effort by Christians to fill this space, this great void in public life, of understanding what it is that Jesus expects of Christians on social media, in politics, and in a deeply divided culture. I don't want to end there because there's a role for people like me. I've placed a burden on Christians in what I've said today, and what I think both the Constitution hopes from them, but also what I think the tenets of their religion intend for them. But that's Mark, my Christian friend. He can't do it on his own. He needs help from this guy, that's me. I also think that I was very wrong in 2003 to think that helping the church thrive in America was none of my business. We'd be fine without it. We could take it for granted. It was a mistake. I think that secular liberals, people like me, can and should do more to make America not just tolerant of Christians and other people of faith, but positively welcoming. I think, for example, it wouldn't hurt us to go to church or mosque even if we're atheist, or synagogue with a friend. In many workplaces, people who are religious kind of keep their religion to themselves. It's not that they're oppressed or anything. It's not that they'd be fired or face discrimination if people knew that they were devout Christians or Latter-day Saints or what have you. But they feel odd talking about it. It doesn't fit in the modern workplace. That should not be the case. People like me in our workplaces should extend a hand. We should be interested in their faith. DEI programs. Now, when DEI does what it's originally supposed to do, which is create more welcoming spaces, people talk about race and they talk about ethnicity. They talk about all kinds of forms of diversity, never religion. Why is that? Why aren't we including diversity and inclusion measures to make sure that our faithful fellow citizens are included? Secular people, I think, have gone too far in advocating separation of church and state, and too far in trying to impose one-size-fits-all laws and solutions on people of faith who may have to violate their faiths in order to follow those laws. I am for separation of church and state. I do not want to have a Christian nation, believe me. I'm an atheistic homosexual Jew. I understand the problems with that. But that said, I also don't think it's really necessary that every single mom and pop bakery in the country be forced to bake a cake for a same-sex wedding. It is perfectly possible to write targeted carve-outs so that people of faith don't have to violate their conscience if other alternatives are available, and they usually are. And guess what? This country has been writing exemptions for people of faith for decades. The original Civil Rights Act of 1964 had religious carve-outs. That shouldn't even be controversial. The last thing that we on my side should be trying to do is threatening people of faith to lose their religious exemptions if they don't follow secular law all the times and all ways. Those are just some of the ways in which I think there is a burden on me and on people like me to make America more welcoming. But I think if Christianity can elevate those elements of Jesus' teaching, which align with the elements of James Madison's teaching, that will make Christianity stronger and more attractive. It will make our democracy stronger and more attractive. Look, I'm an outsider. I am not asking Christians to be more democratic, capital D, or more Republican, or for that matter, not more liberal, or more conservative, or even more small d democratic. All that I am asking is for Christians to become more Christian, to become more like themselves. As a parting note, I would like to dedicate this talk. This is the Reverend Dr. Mark McIntosh. He contracted ALS, Lou Gehrig's syndrome, was fully paralyzed, fortunately retained the capacity to speak. This is, and when I last saw him, shortly before he died, as you can hear from my tone right now and from this lecture, he's a true Christian, and I owe him a great debt. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. We have a few moments for some questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand and I will run the microphone to you. Please state your name. We're gonna start with Jay and then come over to Addie.
Jay Shelby. Those groups that you showed at the end, you said they were evangelical or were they mainline Protestant as well? And I have a follow-up when you tell me that. So.
They're non-denominational because of the nature of how the nonprofits are structured, but they are associated with Protestantism.
And so that, and you pulled out the Mormons. So what's happening in the Catholic runway?
I did less of an investigation of the Catholic. The Conference of Bishops have taken pretty hardline view. Their document, they have a document on how Catholics should approach civic life. It has not been updated for quite a while, and I'm told that the reason for that is that the bishops cannot agree on what the document should say. That document says we should work in good faith in politics. It mentions the word compromise 3 times, and all 3 times it's in a negative light. Basically, we should not compromise. And that's what the bishops, that's been their stance. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I should have mentioned this because it's so remarkable, in 2022, helped push through the Respect for Marriage Act, which enshrined same-sex marriage in federal law, even though the church opposes same-sex marriage. And it did that on the same theory that the church's job is to help us live together. As long as the church doesn't have to recognize same-sex marriage, it said we should live in a society where other people have that choice. The Catholic bishops, of course, fiercely oppose that law. And their view is also shared by the larger evangelical community, which is if something's sinful, we have to oppose it in civic life.
Okay, hi, I'm Addie.
Hi,
My
Addie.
question is, do you believe that reducing partisanship in congregations will increase church membership or bring more people back to churches?
I don't know. What do you think? Are you a church attendee?
No.
Does partisanship have any part of your decision, or is it other factors?
I feel like I mean, there are so many factors, but I feel like when I think about church as someone who's a secular person, I feel like if I walk into a congregation, I could pretty immediately have some sort of political feel.
So the partisanship has not helped the church. So what's the answer? Suppose you could find a church which was dedicated more to the principles we talked about here. Would that bring you back to church, perhaps? Would it make you at least give church a second look?
I think not necessarily like back to church. I don't see religion as something for me, but something I think about in this conversation is the idea of church as community. And I think that's something that you pointed out with like the research on loneliness and things like that. And I think in the US, church is such a big factor of community. And if it could become less partisan, I think more people could feel comfortable entering a church as a point of community rather than solely for religion.
Does anyone else share that feeling? Sir, would you like to say a word about that?
Yeah, I'm Noah, and I think I agree with that. I think that, like in the founding of the United States and all the way up till now, I think churches were the main source of community for a lot of different communities. And I think as secularism has grown, I don't think that community got replaced with a lot of things. So I'm an atheist as well. I don't think there are a lot of communities that are the same standard as religious communities out there.
But you're not someone like Addie who might, well, I guess you're not a candidate who would go to church or be religious if it changed its teaching. Or are you?
I think you can pull a lot out of any given religion, even if it's not something you believe in like with your whole heart. I think you can pull out messaging like parables and stuff. So I think I would be more likely to join other people and support their beliefs if it didn't feel so partisan, for sure. Interesting.
What young people are saying, what your generation is telling us, is that they are hungry for something more spiritual than they're getting from, Soul Cycle. But that they don't want to find it in the traditional big churches and institutions. That they want something that can be more tailored to their needs and more of a personal expression while still being linked to these doctrines. And we're going to see if your generation can define something like that. Russell Moore, who I quoted here, he's been a guiding light of this book. I couldn't have done it without his thinking. He says that the rebuilding of the church today, as has always been true of Christianity when it gets in trouble, it won't be a big schism, the MAGA church versus the anti-MAGA church in a war for control of the movement. That it's going to be church plantings, new generation of pastors, young people, perhaps like you, the small groups in churches that do a lot of the heavy lifting of the Bible study. It's going to arise from the bottom up, from people who want something that is more attuned to the message of Jesus and the gospel. And he says in the past, that's always been how the church renewed itself. And if it comes back, if it can attract at least the interest, if not the actual belief of folks like you and Addie, Noah and Addie, then that would be the hope. Now look, I am not a believer, and I would never tell someone who doesn't believe in God that they should join a church. The only really good reason to belong to a religion is that you think it's true. But that said, I think all of us can learn a lot from religious teachings. And as you can see, I have. Anyone else want to comment on the reason they may have left the church or what might be keeping them away from it? I thought I saw another hand or two go up on that point.
I have a comment. I'm wondering if we could speak. I don't need that. Okay. I wonder if we could
tell us
speak.
who you
Oh, this is Chris Redgrave, and I have a chance to work with the Kempsey Gardner Policy Institute and the director, Natalie Gottner, and I had a chance to listen to you
We met this
earlier.
morning, right?
Yes. And so I'm wondering, to speak generationally, if we were to look at if there could be a movement where we open up spiritual centers, if we just get away from the word church, and then you could bring some of the principles and the ideas in that you're talking about, and you could certainly bring in Jesus Christ and other teachings, but where we start looking at principles and values and civility and how we treat one another. I listened to a gentleman the other day who was fascinating with the Wasatch Speaker Series, Anthony Ray Hinton, who was incarcerated for almost 30 years on death row, and he was completely innocent, and he was fascinating. He was so motivating that I thought if he had a church or if he had a gathering place somewhere, I would go to it, because I felt like he changed me on the spot. His message of compassion and forgiveness was remarkable.
Yeah, people ask me, Do I think the church can come back? I mean, your generation, as we're seeing, is abandoning it in droves for some of the reasons we're discussing today. And I tell them, I don't know if the church can come back. If it keeps going on the road it's been on, I'm not sure I want it to come back. But here's the thing. If it is going to come back, I think its odds are better if it preaches the gospel and models the gospel of Jesus Christ instead of what it's doing now. I think its chances are better. And Christians say that Christianity has always been at its best when it is a shining example of counterculturalism, like Jesus himself, who cut right across the class lines and the political lines of his society to model a whole different way of life, which has inspired generations. And Christians say it's that kind of exilic faith, of being exiles in our own land, missionaries for the radical message of Jesus. That's what they say can bring people back into the church. I don't know if it will or won't. My attitude is, though, at the end of the day, I guess, you've heard the famous quote from Gandhi when asked what he thought of Western civilization. He said, it would be a good idea. So I guess when asked about Christianity, it would be a good idea.
Do we have time for one more question? All right.
So you mentioned a little bit.
Can you introduce
right.
yourself?
Sorry. I'm Keaton Miller, and you mentioned a little bit how.
Are you a student here?
Yes, I am. Sorry. You mentioned a little bit how the evangelical church bought into the Republican Party in hopes that they would be able to influence it a little bit, and that didn't necessarily go according to plan. But for how long would you see Republicans and evangelicals working together and continuing to work in this coalition?
Well, right now they're joined at the hip. From the point of view of the Church of Fear, the MAGA church has just won a famous victory in the person of Donald Trump. Now, I'm not here with a partisan message about who you guys should vote for or support in your politics. But right now, the MAGA wing of the party and the white evangelical movement are closely aligned. People like Russell Moore and David French say that will wear off as the church continues to shrink and more people go outside it. But right now, I think they're like this. Can we do one more over here? Do you have time?
My question was piggybacking off that. My name is Grace. I'm a student. Of course. So with the whole evangelical Republican ties, yesterday, I don't know if you watched the inauguration, but Trump did not put his hand on the Bible when swearing in.
Is that right?
So I
did not know that.
Okay. I was just wondering your opinion on it.
Do we have a political scientist in the room who knows that presidents put their hand on the Bible?
It's not in the Constitution, yeah. It's just a norm.
Have earlier presidents?
He did it he did put his hand on it in 2016.
Did Biden in 2020?
That I know of. I think there was like 3 other exemptions of other people, but.
Well, look, I don't believe America has to be a Christian nation. I don't believe a president should have to put his hand on the Bible. And I especially don't believe a president should have to put his hand on the Bible if he does not believe in what's in the Bible. I suspect that this president has not read the Bible, and I don't think his message is aligned with the Bible, at least not the Christian Bible. And so I'm not a Christian, but I think if I were one, I would say, thank you, Mr. President, for not putting your hand on our Bible. But that's just me. What do you all think? You think he forgot? It could have been the intervention of God.
It's better than when he's holding up the Bible upside down.
Yes, the borrowed Bible, yes, the famous borrowed Bible. Thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you all. Please join me in thanking Mr. Rauch. Thank you.